the San Jose attraction will now allow visitors to view parts of the home that have never been seen before.
This house in California has been hiding something for more than 100 years. According to the famous story, the woman who built it believed she was being hunted by ghosts, so she kept adding rooms, staircases, and hallways, hoping the spirits would never catch her. But what if that wasn't true? In 2015, researchers and preservation teams began opening sealed rooms that had remained locked for decades to find out what had really happened. What started as routine restoration work soon turned into a series of discoveries that challenged everything people thought they knew about Sarah Winchester and her famous mansion. So, what exactly was found inside those hidden rooms? And how do these discoveries finally explain the real story behind the Winchester Mystery House? Let's get into it. The story of Sarah Winchester. Before anyone discovered the hidden rooms, before investigators unlocked doors that had remained sealed for nearly a century, there was one question that needed an answer. Who was Sarah Winchester? Most people only know the famous ghost story. According to the popular legend, she was a grieving widow who believed she was cursed by the spirits of people killed by Winchester rifles. Terrified for her life, she supposedly kept building her house endlessly, adding rooms, staircases, and hallways, hoping to confuse the ghosts and stay alive. That is the version most people know, but almost everything in that story is wrong. Born on June 4, 1839, in New Haven, Connecticut, Sarah belonged to a well-educated and progressive family. Her father, Leonard Pardee, regularly hosted gatherings with freethinkers and reformers. Their family openly discussed ideas like women's suffrage and the abolition of slavery at a time when such topics were considered radical. But her reputation was built on far more than her family background. She became known as one of the most formally educated women of her era. She stood only 4 feet 10 inches tall, yet she spoke Latin, French, Spanish, and Italian fluently by the age of 12. She studied mathematics, science, and Shakespeare at an institution affiliated with Yale College. This was at a time when most women were not permitted anywhere near a university. In 1862, she married William Wirt Winchester, the son of Oliver Winchester, whose company would become famous for manufacturing the Winchester repeating rifle. From the outside, their life looked perfect. Sarah was a well-educated young woman, and William was the son of one of the wealthiest families in America. However, little did they know that life was about to test them in the most painful ways. Their only child, Annie, died just 6 weeks after birth. Then Sarah lost her mother, followed by her father-in-law. And then, in 1881, William died from tuberculosis at just 43 years old, leaving Sarah widowed and one of the wealthiest women in America. Now, Sarah was not a woman controlled by grief or guilt. She was a sharp businesswoman and investor. In 1886, she purchased a modest 8-room farmhouse on 45 acres in San Jose, California. Her doctors had recommended the region's mild climate to help ease her worsening rheumatoid arthritis. She was not fleeing ghosts, as many people would later come to believe. She wasn't trying to escape a curse or hide from restless spirits. Sarah was simply starting a new chapter of her life with the extraordinary wealth, intelligence, and determination. And what she built over the next 38 years would eventually become one of the most famous and most misunderstood houses in America. The Mystery House. If Sarah Winchester was just simply moving to another place to start a better life, then where did that ghost story come from? The first known version of the story appeared in 1895, when a newspaper in San Jose published an article claiming that Sarah believed she would die the moment construction on her house was finished. According to the article, she kept building endlessly to delay her own death. However, there was just one problem with this article. The newspaper offered no evidence, no interview with Sarah. It was simply gossip. For years, that rumor remained, but when Sarah Winchester died in 1922, the story took on a life of its own. Just a few months later, in April 1923, a man named John Brown and his wife, Mamie leased the property. They decided to open the house as a tourist attraction. Now, John was a roller coaster designer, and Mamie became the first tour guide. Visitors arrived expecting to see the strange mansion of a mysterious millionaire. But an unusual house alone wasn't enough to keep people coming back. It needed a story, so the story grew. Mamie began telling visitors that Sarah was obsessed with spirits and built the house to confuse the ghosts of people killed by Winchester rifles. Mamie had never met Sarah. She simply created these stories to entertain tourists. The people who had actually known Sarah told a completely different story. Former workers described her as intelligent, generous, and deeply involved in every detail of the construction. But the ghost story was far more exciting than the truth. As the years passed, the legend spread from one generation to the next. Then, in 1967, it took an even more dramatic turn. A writer named Susie Smith published a book called Prominent American Ghosts. In it, she claimed that a Boston medium named Adam Coons had warned Sarah that she was cursed by the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles. According to the story, the only way to stay alive was to move west and keep building her house forever. However, there was just one problem. There was no clear evidence of this. Historian Mary Jo Ignofo, who spent decades researching Sarah Winchester's life, searched records in both New Haven and Boston but found nothing. However, by then, the damage had already been done. For decades, millions of visitors walked through the Winchester Mystery House, believing they already knew why it had been built. But it was all about to change in 2015, when the investigators would finally begin unlocking rooms that had remained sealed for decades and find out why the house had really been built. The investigation. In 2015, the Winchester Mystery House got a new general manager, Walter Magnuson. Unlike everyone before him, Magnuson wasn't interested in repeating the same tour. He wanted answers, and one simple question immediately caught his attention. Why were so many doors locked? Instead of accepting that every room had already been explored, Magnuson ordered a careful investigation of the mansion. Room by room, hallway by hallway, his team began searching behind sealed doors, hidden walls, and forgotten passageways. Over the next 2 years, they uncovered more than 40 previously sealed or forgotten spaces hidden throughout the house. Some contained vibrant, jewel-colored wallpaper. Others revealed stained glass windows. The team also found secret balconies, forgotten storage areas, hidden attic spaces, and rooms that had vanished from public memory. The discoveries surprised even the preservation team. Because there were no complete blueprints of the Winchester Mystery House, nobody could say with certainty how many hidden spaces were still out there. And then came the most shocking discovery of all. In 2016, the team opened a sealed attic room that had remained untouched since Sarah Winchester died in 1922. But what shocked the team was how well it all was preserved. Inside the room sat a Victorian couch, a pump organ, a sewing machine, and several paintings. It didn't look like a forgotten storage room. It looked like someone had simply walked out for a few minutes and never returned. Everything remained almost exactly where it had been left, nearly 100 years earlier. They eventually named it the Daisy Room, after the delicate daisy flowers pressed into its stained glass windows. This discovery increased the official room count of the Winchester Mystery House to 161 rooms. Over the course of the next few years, the team kept discovering more hidden spaces in the building. But what truly fascinated the researchers wasn't those disguised spaces. It was how well built the whole place was. A house built to last. The more historians studied the newly discovered rooms, the harder it became to believe that Sarah Winchester had been building without a plan, because the house itself looked like an engineering marvel. At a time when indoor plumbing was still considered a luxury in many wealthy homes, Sarah equipped the mansion with both hot and cold running water. She installed an advanced forced air heating system throughout the house, connected to dozens of fireplaces and chimneys. Rather than relying entirely on the city's utilities, She even built her own carbide gas generator to power much of the home's lighting. The house also featured 3 elevators, including an electric Otis model that historians believe was among the earliest residential elevators on the American West Coast. Even the conservatory reflected the same attention to detail. Sarah designed it with automatic watering devices and carefully sloped floors that directed excess water back into the surrounding gardens. But impressive technology wasn't the most remarkable thing about the house. On April 18, 1906, a devastating earthquake, measuring approximately 7.9, rocked the San Francisco Bay Area. Buildings across the region collapsed. The Winchester house suffered heavy damage. Its upper stories were destroyed. Towers collapsed, and several chimneys fell, yet the heart of the mansion remained standing. That wasn't luck. Long before earthquake engineering became an established science, Sarah had chosen a foundation that allowed parts of the building to shift with ground movement rather than resist it completely. Rather than transferring every violent shock directly into the walls, the structure absorbed much of the force, allowing the house to survive when many buildings around it did not. The same design proved itself once again, 80 years later. In 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck Northern California. The surrounding buildings suffered damage, but the Winchester Mystery House survived without catastrophic damage. And when you look at all of it together, the engineering, the advanced technology, and the careful planning behind every addition, it becomes increasingly difficult to believe that Sarah Winchester was building a house to escape ghosts. In fact, one of the biggest pieces of evidence used to support that story would later turn out to be something else entirely: the fake seance room. Of all the rooms inside the Winchester Mystery House, none has become more famous than the one known as the seance room. According to the legend, this was where Sarah Winchester disappeared every night at midnight. The story claimed that a bell would ring, calling the spirits. Sarah would then enter the room alone and stay there for hours, speaking with ghosts who supposedly told her what part of the house she should build next. People even believed the room itself had been designed for these meetings. Its strange layout, with several doors leading in different directions, was said to help Sarah escape if evil spirits tried to follow her. For decades, visitors accepted this story as fact. In fact, it became one of the biggest reasons people came to see the Winchester Mystery House. But there was one major problem. No evidence has ever shown that a single seance actually took place there. When historians spent years researching Sarah Winchester's life, they couldn't find a single letter, diary, or eyewitness account that described the room as a place for talking to spirits. Instead, they found something much more ordinary. The room appears to have been used as a practical workspace. At different times, it likely served as an office and even as sleeping quarters for members of Sarah's household staff. And the more researchers looked, the more famous ghostly features started to make sense. Take the bell, for example. Tour guides claimed it was used to summon spirits, but historians believe it was simply there to call workers or act as a fire alarm. Then there were the many doorways. Rather than confusing ghosts, they matched the practical design of large Victorian homes, allowing servants to move quickly through the house without disturbing Sarah or her guests. Even the famous 13 hooks, often presented as proof of Sarah's obsession with the supernatural, weren't part of the original room at all. Researchers discovered they had actually been added decades later, after the house had already become a tourist attraction. One by one, the stories surrounding the seance room began to fall apart. And if the house's most famous room had been misunderstood for generations, then it makes you wonder how many other stories about Sarah Winchester were wrong as well. The truth about Sarah Winchester. By the time historians had finished examining the hidden rooms, decades of records, and separating fact from fiction, a completely different picture emerged. Sarah wasn't the frightened woman history had remembered. She was one of the most educated women of the 19th century. For nearly 38 years, she personally supervised the transformation of a modest 8-room farmhouse into one of the most extraordinary private residences ever built in America. But perhaps her greatest legacy wasn't the house itself. It was the life she quietly lived beyond its walls. When Sarah Winchester's personal safe was opened after she died in 1922, many expected to find strange objects, spirit messages, or evidence of the seances. Instead, what they found shocked the whole investigation team. Inside the locker were a lock of hair from her daughter Annie, who had died at just 6 weeks old, a pair of tiny, unworn baby shoes, a lock of hair from her husband William, and their death certificates. There were no supernatural artifacts, no messages from ghosts, only the keepsakes of a woman who had endured unimaginable loss. But Sarah Winchester's true legacy goes far beyond that house. It was found in the lives she quietly changed. In 1909, she wrote to the General Hospital Society of Connecticut with a plan to honor her late husband, William, who had died from tuberculosis nearly 3 decades earlier. Only a month later, she donated $300,000, an extraordinary amount at the time. Between 1909 and 1918, her total contributions exceeded $1 million, equivalent to roughly $15 million today. Those donations helped establish the hospital that eventually became the Winchester Center for Lung Disease at Yale New Haven Hospital, where patients are still treated more than a century later. Her generosity extended far beyond medicine. She became one of the early supporters of California's Save the Redwoods movement, helping protect ancient forests at a time when few people considered conservation important. After the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake, she donated to local relief efforts while continuing to employ hundreds of workers during difficult economic times. She treated those workers with remarkable generosity. While many construction laborers earned about $1 a day, Sarah paid hers $3 a day, roughly 3 times the standard wage. She purchased homes for several longtime employees, remembered many of them in her will, and earned such respect that some workers later named their children after her. The people who actually knew Sarah never described her as unstable. They described her as intelligent, practical, and generous. Yet almost none of those qualities became part of the story told to millions of visitors. Instead, the myths became more famous than the woman herself. But after separating decades of legend from documented history, one final question still remained. If Sarah Winchester wasn't building to satisfy ghosts, then what was the real purpose behind that house? The final verdict. For more than 100 years, millions of people were told that Sarah Winchester spent her life building a house because she was afraid of ghosts. But the evidence tells a completely different story. The hidden rooms, the original construction records, and years of historical research all lead to the same conclusion. Sarah Winchester knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't building to escape spirits. She was designing and expanding her home with careful planning. The real Sarah Winchester was not the lonely, frightened woman people had imagined. She was intelligent, independent, and incredibly generous. While ghost tours focused on haunted hallways and midnight seances, very few talked about the way she helped everyone. She never tried to make herself famous. She simply used her wealth to help others, often without putting her name on it. But because she rarely spoke to the public, other people told her story instead. And over time, those stories slowly replaced the truth. It took more than a century, years of careful research, and the discovery of hidden parts of the house before historians were finally able to separate fact from fiction. In the end, the real story of the Winchester Mystery House was never about ghosts or curses. It was about Sarah Winchester, a smart, kind, and generous woman whose true story was hidden behind myths for more than 100 years. So, after hearing the real story, what do you think? Was Sarah Winchester a haunted widow? Or was she simply misunderstood by history? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel If you don't want to miss more deep dive stories like this, we'll see you in the next one.